Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at the Sophists.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
I know a lot of you are really interested in going beyond just like
Yeah.
the simple, oh, they were just manipulative
Yeah.
kind of thing, and really getting down to
Wow.
what their ideas were
Yeah.
and what their influence has been.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Wow.
Looking at all this stuff,
Mhm.
there's some pretty surprising connections to like how we think even today.
Yeah, that's right. The Sophists get a bad rap. People misunderstand them.
Mm,
And I think a deeper look is really warranted. A lot of their ideas
Yeah.
might seem really radical to us or like
Yeah.
totally out there,
yeah.
but they're surprisingly relevant today, you know?
Yeah. So let's just set the scene for everyone. 5th century BC in Athens.
Okay.
So a lot of political change, intellectual ferment happening. What were the Sophists all about in this kind of dynamic setting?
Well, it's important to remember they weren't like a formal school or anything, more
Yeah.
like independent traveling teachers. But one thing that united them was this focus on teaching for pay.
Hmm.
So they were catering to these ambitious Athenians, young men especially, who wanted to move up the political ladder in this direct democracy.
Oh, that makes total sense. Yeah, in a system where persuasion is key,
Exactly.
rhetorical skills are going to be like in super high demand.
You got it.
Was charging for knowledge, though, kind of
Yeah.
a controversial thing back then?
Absolutely. Totally went against the grain of how a lot of philosophers,
Yeah.
especially someone like Socrates,
Yeah.
viewed knowledge. They thought wisdom should be its own reward.
Okay.
The Sophists, though, they saw practical success as the goal,
Okay.
especially in politics. So
Yeah.
different outlooks there.
So they were like the ancient Greek equivalent of political strategists,
Uh-huh.
right? They were teaching these young guys
Yeah.
how to win debates and influence people.
Yes. And this is where rhetoric comes in.
Right.
They weren't just teaching like flowery language. It was more than that.
Right.
They were giving their students these tools for argumentation and persuasion,
Oh, wow.
you know, logical thinking, all that.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how their approach could actually be super useful even today.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about this idea of relativism,
Oh.
right? Because they're kind of famous for that.
Yes.
It sounds pretty radical even now. So what did it mean for the Sophists back then?
Well, for the Sophists, relativism meant questioning,
Okay.
like the very existence of absolute unchanging truth.
Mm-hmm.
They argued that what we perceive as true is actually relative. It
Okay.
could be relative to the individual or their experiences or even their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine the impact of that on a society that's steeped in tradition,
Right.
you know, unquestioned beliefs.
Wow. That must have been like mind-blowing back then.
Totally.
It's like they were introducing this idea that there could be multiple valid perspectives on the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
Did all Sophists, though, share the same views on relativism?
No, not at all.
Okay.
That's what makes them so fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, they did have some core ideas in common,
Right.
but there was a lot of variety in their thinking.
Okay.
So, for example, Protagoras,
Okay.
probably the most famous sophist,
Okay.
is known for his statement, "Man is the measure of all things."
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
It really suggests like a very individualistic
It does.
approach to truth. Was that a common thread among all the Sophists?
Protagoras kind of represents like the extreme end,
Okay.
you know? Other sophists explored different facets of relativism.
Okay.
Take Hippias, for instance.
Okay.
More of an encyclopedic thinker focused on accumulating knowledge
Right.
across disciplines. He might have argued that truth is relative to the field of study.
Okay, so even within this group of traveling teachers,
Yeah.
there was this whole spectrum of thought.
There was.
Yeah, it wasn't just like a
Yeah.
one-size-fits-all
Exactly.
approach to knowledge and truth.
Yeah, and then there's Gorgias. Oh, man, this guy takes skepticism to a whole new level.
Okay.
He challenged the idea that we can even know reality at all.
Wait, so if Gorgias didn't believe in a knowable reality,
Yeah.
what was the point of argumentation or rhetoric for him?
Right.
Was it all just a game?
That is a question that's puzzled scholars for centuries.
Yeah.
Gorgias believed that language had this power to persuade,
Oh,
regardless of whether the speaker even believed in the truth of their arguments.
wow.
You see, it was about the art of persuasion itself,
Okay.
the ability to sway an audience through skillful rhetoric.
That's fascinating and a little unsettling. It makes you think about the power of language
Yeah.
and how it can be used,
Yeah.
for good or for ill. Are there any other Sophists that kind of push these boundaries of
Oh, yeah.
traditional thought?
Yeah. So Antiphon, for instance,
Okay.
he applied sophist thinking to the realm of law and politics.
Mm-hmm.
He grappled with this conflict between natural justice, like universal moral principles, and the laws created by humans, which can vary from place to place.
Oh, so he was like questioning the very foundation of Athenian law by suggesting it might not align with some higher natural order.
Exactly.
It sounds like the Sophists weren't afraid to challenge authority.
No, they weren't. That's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
They weren't just teaching rhetorical tricks.
Right.
They encouraged their students to examine everything.
Okay.
You know? Like individual perception to the laws of society.
That's a pretty valuable skill even today.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me of critical thinking and how it helps us navigate this world that's just flooded with information.
All the time.
Speaking of challenging the status quo, our sources also talk about Thrasymachus and Callicles.
Right.
What were their contributions to this tapestry of sophist thought?
Okay, so these two are particularly interesting because they delve into power and justice. Thrasymachus was pretty cynical. He argued that justice is simply what the strong impose on the weak.
Oh, that's a bleak outlook.
It is.
Doesn't it undermine a just and fair society?
Totally. And Callicles took it even further.
Okay.
He claimed that conventional morality is a tool that the weak use to restrain the strong.
Okay.
He believed natural law favors the powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So any attempt to level the playing field is unnatural.
Wow, that's a pretty radical and potentially dangerous idea, especially in a democracy like Athens. Makes you wonder how these views were received by their contemporaries.
I think it's safe to say they stirred up a lot of controversy, but again, that's what's so compelling about the Sophists.
Right.
They weren't afraid to explore the dark side of human nature and the complex dynamics of power.
So we've gone from Protagoras' focus on individual perception to Gorgias questioning the nature of reality.
Yeah.
Figures like Thrasymachus and Callicles challenging justice.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how such diverse thinkers all fit under this umbrella of sophism.
Right.
What does this tell us about their impact?
Okay.
Especially compared to other philosophical schools at the time?
That's a great question. To understand their impact, I think we need to zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Look at the broader intellectual landscape of ancient Greece before the Sophists.
Yeah.
Philosophers were primarily concerned with understanding the natural world.
Okay.
You know, like the cosmos, the elements.
Right.
The Sophists shifted the focus to something totally new.
Okay.
Humanity itself.
Oh, that sounds like a major turning point. They were paving the way for fields like psychology, sociology, political science.
Absolutely.
Wow.
By turning their attention to human behavior, societal structures, they were venturing into uncharted territory.
Okay.
This shift had a profound impact on Western thought.
Okay.
Influencing everything from how we view knowledge and truth to how we approach politics and ethics.
It's incredible how these ideas from thousands of years ago are still so relevant today.
They are.
It makes you wonder how the Sophists' ideas were received by other philosophical giants of the time.
Like who?
Like Socrates. Was there really this philosophical showdown?
The relationship between Socrates and the Sophists is complicated.
Okay.
And often oversimplified.
Okay.
Our main source of information about this period comes from Plato, who was a student of Socrates.
Yeah.
And let's just say he wasn't a fan of the Sophists.
I can imagine Socrates with his emphasis on absolute truth, engaging in dialogue, probably clashed with the Sophists' focus on relativism and persuasive rhetoric.
It's a safe assumption. It's important to remember, though, that our view of the Sophists is largely filtered through Plato's lens.
Okay.
And that might not be totally objective. While there were definitely differences in their approaches, the relationship between Socrates and the Sophists was probably more nuanced than a simple showdown.
Yeah, it's so interesting how history can be shaped by the perspectives of those who write about it. It reminds us to always be critical of our sources and consider different interpretations.
Sure.
But before we kind of dive into the Sophists' interactions with other philosophers, let's focus on their practical impact on Athenian society.
Okay.
They were training the next generation of politicians, right?
They were.
What kind of influence did that have on the Athenian political landscape?
You're right to bring that up.
Yeah.
Remember, Athenian democracy depended on citizens actively participating in political life.
Okay.
Politicians needed to persuade, debate, build consensus.
Right.
The Sophists, with their training in rhetoric and argumentation, were equipping these future leaders with the tools to navigate this really complex system.
So it wasn't just about like winning arguments.
Yeah.
It was about understanding how to effectively communicate and engage in the political process.
Yeah, think of it like this.
Okay.
Athenian political life was like a constant public debate with citizens voting on laws and policies.
Right.
The Sophists were essentially training people to be effective participants in that debate.
That sounds pretty crucial for a functioning democracy.
Uh-huh.
It makes you wonder if any specific decisions or events in Athenian history were influenced by the Sophists and their teachings.
Yeah.
Do our sources shed any light on that?
Well, it's tough to draw a direct line from Sophist teachings to specific political outcomes.
Okay.
But their influence is evident in the overall shift in Athenian political discourse.
Okay.
They contributed to a climate of critical thinking,
okay,
where traditional values and authority were no longer taken for granted.
So they were like the intellectual catalysts, shaking things up, making people question the status quo. That's a pretty powerful legacy.
It is. And their focus on the human condition, rather than just the natural world, really expanded the scope of what was considered worthy of philosophical inquiry.
Okay.
They paved the way for future thinkers to explore, the complexities of society, politics, individual behavior.
It's amazing how these ideas that seemed so radical at the time laid the groundwork for fields of study that we just take for granted today.
I know, right.
Let's go back to this idea of rhetoric for a moment.
Okay.
Because it's often seen as something negative.
Yeah, like manipulation or deceit, right?
But the Sophists clearly saw it as a valuable skill.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile those two views?
That's a great point. Rhetoric, like any tool, can be used for good or ill.
Right.
The Sophists understood its power, both to enlighten and to mislead.
Okay.
The key is recognizing that skillful communication is essential for any society.
Okay.
Especially a democracy where ideas are constantly being debated.
Right.
Decisions are made through persuasion.
So it's about using rhetoric responsibly.
Yeah.
With a focus on clarity, logic.
Yes.
A genuine desire to engage in meaningful dialogue.
You got it. The Sophists, despite their reputation for trickery, emphasized the importance of sound arguments and logical reasoning.
Right.
They weren't just teaching empty rhetoric. They were training people to think critically, construct persuasive arguments based on evidence and logic.
It sounds like they were walking a fine line then.
They were.
Between teaching effective communication and potentially equipping people to manipulate others.
Absolutely. That tension is just inherent in the study of rhetoric. It's something we still grapple with today.
Right.
Think about how information is spread today, how people are persuaded, especially in the age of social media.
That's a chilling thought. It's like the Sophists' ideas have become even more relevant in our current world, where information overload and misinformation are
huge challenges.
Yeah, huge challenges.
Yeah.
It makes their focus on critical thinking all the more important.
You're right. The Sophists, in a way, were preparing people for a world where they'd be bombarded with information and would need to figure out how to separate truth from falsehood.
It's like they were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Recognizing the importance of media literacy centuries before the internet even existed.
And their influence goes way beyond ancient Athens.
Okay.
Their emphasis on rhetoric and argumentation laid the groundwork for formal logic, which is still used today in philosophy, mathematics, computer science.
So even though they're associated with manipulative speech, they actually helped develop tools for critical thinking and logical analysis.
That's right. It's a paradox.
Yeah, that's quite a paradox.
Their contributions go beyond logic, too.
Oh.
They're focused on the human condition, understanding how individuals and societies function. That paved the way for the social sciences.
Right.
Think about fields like psychology, sociology, political science.
They all owe a debt to the Sophists.
They do.
For shifting philosophical inquiry towards human behavior.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Good.
I came in thinking the Sophists were all about slick talking and winning arguments at any cost. But I see them as these complex figures who helped shape how we think about knowledge, truth ourselves.
And that's exactly why it's so important to dig deeper, go beyond those simple narratives, and understand the nuances of their ideas. They challenge us to think critically, to question our assumptions, recognize that there are all these different ways that we construct meaning and understanding.
Speaking of challenging assumptions, I have to admit, I'm still a bit uneasy.
About what?
With this idea of relativism.
Oh, okay.
Like, if there's no absolute truth, what's the point of anything?
Right.
Doesn't it lead to chaos?
Yeah.
And moral ambiguity?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That has haunted philosophers for centuries.
Yeah.
And it's one that each of us kind of grapples with on our own terms.
Yeah.
The Sophists didn't offer, like, easy answers.
Okay.
They highlighted the complexities of knowledge.
Okay.
Challenged this idea that truth is always fixed and absolute.
So it's not about rejecting truth altogether.
Right.
But rather recognizing that our understanding of it can be influenced by,
what?
Our own individual experiences and the society that we live in.
Exactly. And perhaps by embracing this idea of multiple perspectives, we can actually find new ways to engage with each other. Bridge divides, create a more inclusive, understanding world.
That's a hopeful thought.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to impose, our own version of the truth on others.
Right.
We can acknowledge that there are multiple ways of seeing things.
Yes.
And that each perspective has its own validity.
Exactly. By engaging with those different perspectives, we can enrich our own understanding, challenge our assumptions, and maybe even find common ground where we least expect it.
This has been an incredible journey. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the Sophists and their contribution to Western thought.
I'm glad to hear that.
But before we wrap up this exploration, I'm curious about your take on Protagoras' famous statement, man is the measure of all things.
Oh, yeah.
What does that even mean in like a practical sense?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Protagoras was essentially saying that our individual perceptions, our experiences shape how we understand the world. This doesn't mean that there's no external reality, but that our access to it is always filtered through our senses, our beliefs, our cultural context.
So it's not that there's no truth.
Yeah.
It's just that truth is multifaceted and can be perceived differently.
Exactly.
Depending on who's looking at it.
That's right. And this has fascinating implications
Yeah.
for how we approach knowledge communication, even our relationships with each other.
Okay.
If we acknowledge that different people might have different perspectives on the same issue,
yeah,
it encourages us to be more open-minded, to listen to others.
Right.
To really try to understand where they're coming from.
That's a powerful message, especially in today's world.
Oh, yeah.
Where it seems like everyone's shouting their opinions.
Yeah.
Without really listening to each other.
Yeah.
Maybe we could all use a little dose of sophist wisdom right now.
Maybe so. The Sophists remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is this ongoing process, requires critical thinking, open-mindedness, and a willingness to engage in respectful dialogue.
Even with those who hold different views.
Well said. This deep dive has been a true revelation. I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm glad.
Not just about the Sophists themselves, but also about like the enduring power of ideas, the importance of challenging our assumptions.
Absolutely.
You've definitely inspired me to keep digging.
Good.
But before we wrap up, is there a particular Sophist whose ideas resonated with you the most?
Oh, that's a tough one. They each offer such unique perspectives.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose, I'd say Gorgias.
Okay.
His radical skepticism and focus on the persuasive power of language make him really intriguing, especially in our current age, with information overload, the blurring of lines between truth and fiction.
Gorgias, the master of persuasion. I can see why you'd find him fascinating.
Yeah.
He's a reminder that we should always be critical of what we hear and see, even when it comes from seemingly authoritative sources.
Exactly. We need to be discerning consumers of information.
Constantly questioning, analyzing, seeking out multiple perspectives.
Right.
That's the true legacy of the Sophists.
Okay.
To empower us with those tools for critical thinking.
Right.
Encourage us to never stop questioning the world around us.
What a brilliant insight.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been a true revelation.
Good.
I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of the Sophists
Yeah.
and their enduring impact on Western thought.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to be pondering those implications of man is the measure of all things.
It's a good one.
Yeah, for a long time to come.
It's a good one to ponder.
Yeah, and on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode.
Okay. Yeah, they were equipping these future leaders with the tools to navigate this really complex system.
So it wasn't just about winning arguments.
No.
It was about understanding how to effectively communicate,
Yeah.
engage in the political process.
Think of it like this Athenian political life was like this constant public debate.
Okay.
Citizens voting on laws and policies.
Okay.
And the Sophists were training people to be like effective participants in that debate.
It makes you wonder if there were like specific decisions or events in Athenian history that were influenced by, the Sophists and their teachings.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. It's tough to draw like a direct line from their teachings to specific political outcomes.
Right.
But you can see their influence in the overall shift in Athenian political discourse.
Okay.
They contributed to this climate of critical thinking where traditional values and authority were no longer just taken for granted.
So they were like the intellectual catalysts.
Yeah.
Shaking things up, making people question the status quo.
Yeah, and they also, their focus on the human condition rather than just the natural world, that really expanded the scope of philosophical inquiry, paved the way for future thinkers to explore, the complexities of society, politics, individual behavior.
It's amazing how these ideas, that seemed so radical at the time, laid the groundwork for fields of study that we consider like fundamental today.
It's true.
Let's go back to this idea of rhetoric for a moment.
Okay.
Because it's often seen as something negative, associated with like manipulation, deceit.
Right.
But the Sophists clearly saw it as
a valuable skill.
Yeah, as a valuable skill.
Yeah, rhetoric is like any tool
Yeah.
It can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
The Sophists understood its power, both to enlighten and to mislead. The key is recognizing that skillful communication is essential, especially in a democracy where ideas are constantly being debated and decisions are made through persuasion.
So it's about using rhetoric responsibly.
It is.
With a focus on clarity.
Yes.
Logic, a genuine desire to like engage in meaningful dialogue.
Absolutely. The Sophists, despite their reputation, for trickery, really emphasize sound arguments and logical reasoning.
Right.
They weren't just teaching empty rhetoric.
Yeah.
They were training people to think critically and to construct these arguments based on evidence and logic.
So it sounds like they were walking this fine line.
Yeah, they were.
Between teaching effective communication and potentially equipping people.
To manipulate others.
Yeah, to manipulate others.
Absolutely. That tension is inherent in rhetoric.
Yeah.
We still grapple with it today.
Right.
Think about how information is spread, how people are persuaded these days, especially with social media.
It's like the Sophists' ideas have become even more relevant now than they were back then.
Right.
Because we have this information overload.
Yes.
And misinformation
is huge.
A huge problem.
It is.
It makes their focus on critical thinking all the more important.
You're right. The Sophists were kind of preparing people for this world.
Right.
Where they'd be bombarded with information and have to figure out what's true and what's not.
Right. It's like they were ahead of their time, recognizing the importance of media literacy centuries before the internet existed.
And their influence goes beyond ancient Athens.
Yeah.
Their emphasis on rhetoric and argumentation.
Yeah.
That laid the groundwork for formal logic.
Okay.
Which we still use today in philosophy.
Wow.
Math, computer science.
So even though they're associated with manipulative speech, they actually helped develop the tools for critical thinking and logical analysis.
Yeah, it's a paradox.
It's a real paradox.
It is.
Their contributions go beyond logic, too.
They do.
Their focus on the human condition. Right. Understanding how individuals and societies function.
Yeah.
Paved the way for the social sciences.
They did.
Right? Psychology,
yes.
Sociology, political science.
All of them.
They all owe a debt to the Sophists.
Yeah.
For shifting that philosophical inquiry towards human behavior and societal structures.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been like a real eye-opener. Because I came in thinking they were all about slick talking.
Right.
Winning arguments at any cost.
Yeah.
But now I see them as these complex figures.
Yeah.
Who really helped shape how we think about knowledge, truth ourselves.
And that's why it's so important to go beyond, those simplified narratives and really try to
understand.
Yeah, unpack those nuances.
Yeah.
Because they challenge us to think critically. Question assumptions.
Right.
Recognize all the different ways that we construct meaning and understanding.
Speaking of challenging assumptions, I have to admit, I'm still a little uneasy with this whole idea of relativism. Okay. If there's no absolute truth, what's the point of anything?
Right.
Doesn't it lead to chaos and moral ambiguity?
That is the question, right?
Yeah.
It's a question that's haunted philosophers for centuries.
Yeah.
And it's a question that we each kind of grapple with.
Right.
On our own.
In our own way.
Yeah, in our own way.
Yeah.
The Sophists didn't offer any easy answers that highlighted the complexities and challenged the idea that truth is fixed.
Right.
And absolute.
So it's not about rejecting truth altogether. It's about recognizing that.
It's about understanding.
Yeah, our understanding of it can be influenced by our own individual experiences and the society that we live in.
And maybe by embracing this idea of multiple perspectives, we can find new ways to engage with each other. Right. Bridge divides, create a more inclusive, understanding world.
That's a really hopeful thought.
It is.
Because instead of, trying to impose our version of the truth on others, we can acknowledge that there are multiple ways of seeing things.
And that each perspective has its own validity.
Yeah.
By engaging with those different perspectives.
Right.
We enrich our own understanding, challenge our own assumptions, and maybe even find common ground when we least expect it.
This has been incredible. I feel like I've gained this whole new appreciation for the Sophists and their contribution
I'm glad.
to Western thought.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this exploration, I'm really curious about your take on Protagoras' famous statement, "Man is the measure of all things."
Oh, yeah.
What does that even mean, practically speaking?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Protagoras was essentially saying that our individual perceptions and experiences shape how we understand the world. That doesn't mean there's no external reality. It means that our access to it is always filtered through our senses, our beliefs, our cultural context.
So it's not that there's no truth. It's just that...
Yeah, truth is multifaceted.
Yeah.
It can be perceived differently.
Right.
Depending on who's looking at it.
This has fascinating implications for how we approach knowledge, communication, even our relationships.
Absolutely.
If we acknowledge that different people might have different perspectives on the same issue, it encourages us to be more open-minded, to listen to others, to really try to understand, where they're coming from.
That's a powerful message.
Especially in today's world, where it feels like...
where everyone's just...
shouting their opinions.
Without listening.
Yeah, maybe we could all use a little sophist wisdom.
I think so.
The Sophists remind us.
That the pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing process. It requires critical thinking, open-mindedness, willingness to engage in dialogue, even when people have different views.
This deep dive has been a true revelation.
Good. I'm glad.
I feel like I've learned so much.
And
not just about the Sophists themselves, but about the enduring power of ideas and the importance of challenging our assumptions.
You've definitely inspired me to keep digging.
Look good.
But before we wrap up, is there a particular Sophist whose ideas really resonated with you?
Oh, that's a tough one, because they all offer such unique perspectives.
They do.
But if I had to choose, I think I'd say Gorgias.
Oh, yeah.
His radical skepticism and focus on the power of language make him a really intriguing figure.
Yeah, especially now, you know, with information overload.
Right, the blurring of lines between truth
And fiction.
Gorgias, the master of persuasion.
Yeah.
I can see why you'd find him so fascinating.
Yeah, he reminds us we should always be critical of what we hear, what we see.
Even when it comes from seemingly authoritative sources.
Yeah, we need to be discerning consumers of information.
Right.
Constantly questioning, analyzing, seeking out multiple perspectives.
Right.
That's the true legacy of the Sophists.
Okay.
To empower us with the tools to think critically.
Right.
Encourage us to never stop questioning the world.
This has been a true revelation, I feel like.
I'm glad.
I've gained this whole new understanding of the Sophists, their impact on Western thought.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to be thinking about those implications of man is the measure of all things.
That's a good one.
Yeah, for a long time.
It is a good one.
Yeah. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Oh, okay.
Let's go back to that idea from Protagoras. Man is the measure of all things.
Right.
If we take that seriously, what does that mean for how we understand, our world, our values, even our own identities?
Big questions.
Yeah. So if we're all measuring things by our own individual yardsticks, doesn't that make it impossible to find common ground?
Right.
How can we build a society, make decisions, or even have a conversation?
Right.
If there's no shared understanding of truth.
Yeah, that's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a question that people still debate today.
Right.
The Sophists didn't shy away from those tough questions, They forced people to confront the complexities and the different ways we all perceive the world.
So maybe instead of seeing this as a recipe for chaos, we can view it as a call for empathy and understanding.
Okay.
If we accept that others might have different truths based on their experiences, it could lead to
more open-minded.
More open-minded dialogue, a willingness to see things from multiple perspectives.
It's about recognizing the limits of our own perspective.
Right.
And being open to the possibility that others might have insights.
Right.
Even if they're different from our own.
Yeah.
That's a good foundation
Right.
for building bridges and finding common ground.
This whole deep dive has been mind-expanding. I feel like I went from seeing the Sophists as manipulative to recognizing them as these complex thinkers who wrestled with these fundamental questions about knowledge, truth, and the human condition.
Their ideas still resonate today.
Yeah.
Maybe in ways we don't even realize. Their emphasis on critical thinking, exploring the power of language, challenging traditional ways of thinking.
It's like they were laying the groundwork for how we navigate this world that's just overflowing with information.
Right.
Where we have to constantly evaluate different perspectives.
It's true.
Yeah.
I think the most important lesson from the Sophists is this.
Okay.
Never stop questioning.
Right. Never stop seeking understanding.
Yeah.
Never be afraid to engage in debate.
Right.
Even when there are no easy answers.
That's a fantastic takeaway. So to our listener out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this world of the Sophists.
Read their works.
Yeah.
Think about their ideas.
Right.
See how they apply to your own life.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Remember, man is the measure of all things.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we're trapped in our own bubbles.
Right.
It's an invitation to engage.
Yeah.
To learn from each other's perspectives.
Right.
Build a better understanding.
Together.
Yeah.
Together.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks so much for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
Into the fascinating world of the Sophists.
They are fascinating, aren't they?
They really are.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope this has sparked your curiosity.
Sure.
And inspired you to keep learning. Until next time, happy exploring.